Hi, everyone. Welcome back to part two of the podcasts we're doing with Kev Donnellon. Kev described himself as a thalidomide. He's a four-limber, someone who was affected on all four limbs by thalidomide when he was born. And we did our first podcast a few weeks ago. Check that one out. It's really good about how thalidomide impacted upon Kevin and other people and his kind of journey, if you like. We didn't quite mention what thalidomide was for, and I think, Kevin, it was a sedative. Many people attribute it to morning sickness. It was given to pregnant women for morning sickness, but it was a sedative given for a host of things, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Basically, it was advertised as some kind of wonder drug, which was ideal for pregnant women. So it was targeted specifically for pregnant women. And a lot of the media just say, "Oh, it was a morning sickness drug," but it was more than that. It was a very strong sedative,
Mm.
and it was given for a variety of reasons, really, as well as nausea, calming the nerves down, and things like that. And it also acted as like a sleeping pill and also it helped in terms of pain relief. So it was advertised as this wonder drug, specifically marketed to pregnant women. And I've
Mm.
seen the early posters where there's like a cartoon drawing of a pregnant woman, and it says, "This is safe for your baby," which is an ironic thing. It was anything but safe.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's why it's kind of got this name now, hasn't it? I mean, it's the word thalidomide. It kind of strikes fear into people, doesn't it? Just the very mention of it because of what it's connected with. To say that it's outrageous, isn't it? To look at that now, like, and to think they were saying that at the time. It just goes to show how poor the processes were. Now, we talked about your long struggle for justice, if you want to call it that,
Yeah, yeah.
and your life growing up, the difficulties you faced, and how you were just a normal person trying to live a normal life. And that's what many people with disabilities say. So we,
Yeah.
we got up to your story with Mrs. Skelley, where you were at a school, and Mrs. Skelley said, I want to take some of the people here. I want to take all the people at this school and put them into mainstream school because I think they're missing out. And you were nearly left behind, weren't you? And Miss Skelley said, if Kevin doesn't come, none of them come. And that was would you say that was quite a big moment in your life?
Oh God, yeah. When I heard that many years later, I was really, really moved. The fact that that was said, yeah, it was very moving. I mean, going back a bit, it from the 1960s onwards, the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act, parents of disabled kids had two choices. They either stayed at home or they went to a special school.
Yeah.
There was no proper provision for education for disabled children. We were all basically written off as seen as unproductive for the workforce, that kind of thing. So education was not on the list of priorities for disabled kids. The special schools were places of containment, and I went to Greenbank School of Rest and Recovery.
Yeah.
Rest and recovery, that says it all, doesn't it?
Mm.
And it was basically run by the NHS. It wasn't even run by the Education Authority. So, as I say, it was a place of containment. And disabled kids weren't put through examinations or anything like that. It was just a place to dump them, basically. And it gave respite. It gave a lot of respite to parents, but that was the only thing it did, really. And my mother realised I would never get an education if I stayed there, because there was kids from like 4.5 to 16 in that one school, a variety of disabilities. And because there was a lot of thalidomiders in the early 60s, there was a whole bunch of us. There was about 20 of us that went to that school.
Yeah.
But Miss Skelley took a dozen of us. And as you say, they said, "Oh, leave Kevin here, he's one of the worst." And she said, "If Kevin doesn't go, none of them go." And she was very formidable. She was a really strong woman. And apparently there was a lot of aggravation from all the parents. They didn't want disabled kids in the school mixing with their kids for some
Mm.
reason.
Mm.
So Miss Skelley read the riot act to the other parents and said, "It's happening,
Yeah.
you know, whether you like it or not." And,
I mean,
and
that's just such a powerful story. And we covered a lot of this in the last podcast. But
yeah.
after that, you kind of went to you basically went through education, higher education, didn't you?
After I'd gone through mainstream school and junior school, we thought, "Oh, well, be a doddle getting into secondary school because I proved that I could go to mainstream school." But exactly the same thing happened.
Mm.
All the secondary schools in the area where I lived in Crosby said no. And in those days, you didn't even have to give a reason. You didn't even have to give an excuse. You just said no. So eventually we found a school in called Highfield Comprehensive. I think it's called Broad Green Wales School now. It's on the top of Queen's Drive.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Um, and it was just a regular comprehensive school. And again, most of the kids who went to Dovecot went with me to Highfield. After secondary school, I was really, even at 16, I was passionate about politics and I wanted to go to university to study politics. And I went round Liverpool and Manchester University and it was completely inaccessible. I'm talking about the mid 1980s,
Mm.
completely inaccessible. And the idea of a disabled person going to university, it was as rare as the dodo. I mean, the only disabled person that I knew of that went to university was Stephen Hawking. He went to Cambridge University, but he was already at university when he was diagnosed with his motor neuron disease. And this brilliant guy, Cambridge University, accommodated him. But if he'd have applied to go to university before when he was diagnosed, they wouldn't have let him in. Despite him being a brilliant genius, he wouldn't have gotten to Cambridge
Mm.
if he hadn't already been diagnosed when he was already there. Yeah, disabled people just didn't go to university. Another factor, it wasn't just access as well. It was the fact that a lot of them hadn't been educated in mainstream school, hadn't been put through any examinations, didn't have O levels and A levels in those days. So that was really rare for disabled persons to have O levels and A levels. After the A levels, basically, I gave up on university because they were completely inaccessible. But luckily, it was the International Year of Disabled People, and Sefton Council decided to pay lip service to it. So they set up what was called the Welfare Advisory Service for Disabled People. And he rang me up, the social worker rang me up and said, we need someone disabled on the team to give it credibility. Are you interested in the job? That's exactly what they said. We need someone on the team to give it credibility. Are you interested? So I jumped at the chance because I was told by my careers advisor, by my mother, by everyone who knew me that I'd never get a job. My mother says on national television I was unemployable, you'll never have a job, etc. So I jumped at the chance. It was one of these job creation schemes, the Thatcher. So it was like, very minimum wage. And it was basically, they just set it up to pay lip service to this internationally disabled people. And we were based in the Centre for Deaf People in Crosby, the Centre for the Deaf, as it was called. It wasn't really funded very well. And our supervisor was the social worker for the deaf, and he wasn't really bothered about it. And we never it wasn't even advertised the service, so we hardly had any phone calls. I taught myself about welfare rights and welfare benefits. There was no training or anything like that. And basically, it was a paid holiday. And I met some interesting people, and I basically had a ball. It wasn't really a proper job. It was just something created. But I wasn't complaining because at least I was doing something. I was getting out of bed and going to work. They allowed me to stay on another year. It was only supposed to be for a year, and then other staff would, other young people would take over. But I worked for them for 2 years. And by that time, I'd self-taught about, welfare rights and stuff. And then he kept me on as a welfare rights officer, or information officer was my job title, which was a step up, and it was a permanent post, so I was thrilled. And I used to go to appeal tribunals and represent people at appeal tribunals. And I remember one case of an old man who walked with two walking sticks, and he kept getting knocked back with mobility allowance. And I fought his appeal, and he got something like 6 years back pay. And he was in my office, dead emotional, crying. And that was fabulous doing things like that, you know what I mean?
Mm.
Because my success rate at appeal tribunals was really good.
Mm.
But most of the time, I'd be in a health centre in Bootle or Neverton, and most of the clients would come in and say, "My gyno hasn't arrived." And I'd say, "Well, go over and wait for the second post." And that was the majority of clients.
Mm.
But when I actually could help people, then that gave me a lot of satisfaction. But
Mm.
it wasn't just for disabled people; it was open to anyone. And eventually, when word got around that I was the only welfare rights advisor in the whole of Sefton, because that team had been disbanded by then, I had a massive caseload. I was seeing clients every 10 minutes. I had a bigger caseload than the average social worker. And then I spoke to my union rep, and he went mad. He said, "You're on the lowest pay scale going. You've got a bigger caseload than I have." And I didn't want to make any fuss because, I was grateful to have a job because I was always told you'll never get a job.
Mm,
So I thought, oh, don't worry about it. I'm happy. He looked into it. He found that comparative jobs, what I was doing, representing people at appeal tribunals and things like that, they were on senior officer one level. I was on clerical assistant level. So I was on the lowest grade ever, but I was doing a professional job. They put in for a pay increase. I remember going to the tribunal, the works tribunal. Oh, before that, the director of social services, Pauline Farrell, she was a sweet old lady, but very old fashioned. And every meeting she had, she would always say, "We're an equal opportunities employer." And she always name dropped me. She's like, "Kevin Donnellon's our welfare rights officer, and he's disabled, and we employ him." And I was kind of like the figurehead for their
mm,
equal opportunities program, if you like. But they were paying me shit wages. But I did not want to rock the boat. Anyway, it's the old days of the uni was called NALGO. I think it's called Unite now,
mm,
National Association of Local Government Officers. And when we went to the appeal tribunal, they said, he's not a welfare rights officer. That's not in his contract. I never actually had a contract. And the union said, he is a welfare rights officer. And they said, no, he isn't. But the union had a big ace card up their sleeve. What Sefton Council had done was put posters all around the offices, all around Sefton, advertising me as a welfare rights officer. So the union rep just got one of these posters out. And apparently the bloke who was representing the council, I met him like 30 years later. It was one of his first jobs. He said that was the worst day of my life trying to defend the council. So what happened was I got an increase from scale one to scale nine, which was the biggest increase in the history of Nalgo. And the union rep used me as an example every time he spoke about, what the union was doing. So then Pauline Farrell retired, they got a new director in. And then they got a bit shitty, really. I was classed as a troublemaker because I had this massive pay rise. And they put me in different offices. And one office was completely inaccessible. And I had two big steps going into the office. So I couldn't use my electric wheelchair. So I had to get taxi drivers to help me into the building. And I remember the social worker saying, "I can't use my any of my staff to help you into the building." And we get like really shitty and dead awkward with me. Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
The job was getting me down. It wasn't the same anymore because I was deemed as this troublemaker. I signed myself off sick, and it worked out my benefits and worked out that I wouldn't be much worse off, even on scale nine. With all the benefits that I could claim. And then eventually I resigned, and the director wouldn't accept my resignation notice. But on the second attempt, I resigned, and then they accepted it. And then after I resigned, it went to another appeal tribunal, and they increased my wages again to senior officer level one, and they gave me like 5 years back pay. So that was my first job.
Mm. But
In
that kind
between,
of
go on.
radicalizes you, doesn't it? Because I did
Yeah,
casework for the
yeah,
union, for the teachers' union, the NEU,
yeah,
for a couple, well, 18 months I did it. And you see things and you learn things and you experience things.
yeah,
And
yeah.
kind of when you're dealing with like the rougher end of things as well, people who are struggling and people, you see injustice. I think it does change your whole perspective on everything, doesn't it?
It definitely did radicalize me because at first I just wanted to rock the boat, just be
Mm,
grateful to have a job. Then I realized I was being used as like this mascot for
mm,
equal opportunities, but I wasn't getting recognized for the work that I was doing because I really did have a massive caseload and I wasn't, getting a lot of success with the old tribunals and things. Also, one of the social workers was in the Socialist Workers' Party, which I'd never heard of, and he invited me to a meeting, and that's how I got involved in left-wing politics. And ended up selling the Socialist Worker on the street corner when I left home. And when I lived at home, I was kind of like wrapped up in cotton wool by my mother because mother had like she'd had like a nervous breakdown when my dad died,
mm.
and she became like massively overprotective. So I kind of threw myself into things that I knew would get the approval of my mother. So she used to walk past me in the street when I was selling the papers, pretending she never knew me. And also another time was I was invited to a green fair in the Wirral because I was very much the buzzwords at the time was ecology,
Yeah,
and green issues and stuff like that. And I was very much interested in that kind of thing as well. So I went to this green fair on the Wirral, and I saw this priest walking around, and he had this massive multicolored scarf around his neck, like that Doctor Who bloke.
yeah.
He had this like big multicolored scarf, and I thought he's interested. So I got chatting to him, and he gave me a leaflet about the Snowball campaign. And I said, "What's this then?" And he told me it was a campaign to protest against nuclear missiles. And it was at the height of the Cold War in the 1980s. Uh, Thatcher invited Ronald Reagan to bring over his cruise missiles and base them in Britain. So we were the target for the USSR, the height of the Cold War.
Hmm.
And he told me there was a demo the following week. Would you like to go? So I said, yeah, definitely. At the same time, World in Action was doing another documentary about me. And he said, are you doing anything interesting at the weekend? I said, actually, I'm going to a demo campaigning against nuclear missiles. So they said, okay, brilliant, we'll film that. I had to pretend that I didn't know them. The film crew arrived first. And when I arrived, I had to pretend they weren't with me. So they were filming this, and we were marching up the road. I was leading the march, and there's a big band behind me, this big brass band. And I was with my friends, and we got to the fence of this American airbase, and I was given a hacksaw blade. On the telly, it looks like a nail file, but it was a hacksaw blade. I thought, shit, what do we do now? And then my comrade said, just start cutting the fence. You'll get arrested immediately. So I started cutting the fence with this hacksaw blade. And the minutes went by and nothing happened. And I noticed my friends were getting arrested immediately. As soon as the blade touched the fence, they were arrested. And I got bored, quite frankly. I was cutting this fence. I even got through the plastic coating of the wire. And then eventually a cop would come up to me and very tentatively he took the blade out my hand. And he said, oh no, first of all, he said, will you stop cutting that fence? And I was told to ignore him. And then he said about 5 times, will you stop cutting that fence? And this is all filmed on telly. And then eventually he very tentatively took away the blade. And then the band struck up and someone said, well done, Kevin. And then they wheeled me into the base because I was in my manual
Yeah.
wheelchair. They wheel me into the base. And what happens is you go up these flights of steps to their room where MI5 or whatever take a photograph. But obviously I couldn't go up the steps. So they had to bring the camera down to me on this big tripod. And they brought the camera down and took a photograph of me. I pulled a silly face. And I thought, brilliant, I'll be up in court next week fighting for against nuclear bombs. But what happened was I got a letter from the Chief Constable of Cheshire saying we're not taking any further action against you. And I was fuming because my mates were up in court and
Hmm.
yet they would let me off. So I immediately thought, patronising bastards, they're doing it because I'm disabled. And people were saying to me, oh, you've been led on, you've been led astray, as if I didn't have a mind of my own.
Yeah.
But I was passionate about these things. It was a really frightening time during the Cold War. I decided to do it again. This time there was no TV cameras, and I used a powered wheelchair this time, so it was even more awkward for them. But this time, as soon as the blade touched the fence, I was arrested immediately, and I had to follow the copper into the base. And again, he brought down the camera, and again, I pulled a silly face. And I thought, this time I'm going to be in court. Guess what happened? I got another letter from the chief
Hmm.
constable saying, we're not taking any further action. I had them both framed on the wall. I thought, fucking hell, what am I going to do to be arrested, murder someone? Basically, there was a more simple explanation. The law courts were not accessible for wheelchair users during that time. So it was deemed too awkward to prosecute me. But when I was driving around in my car, I'd be stopped by the busies every 10 minutes. It was like they were following me. And I got totally paranoid. Every
Hmm.
time I went out, the police would pull me up in my car for like, some obscure reason. It was weird. So that went on for a few weeks, but that was strange. So that was my first taste of radical politics, if you like. And then I joined all the other big demos, the SWP, anti-apartheid marches and things like that. I remember going on a big, massive anti-apartheid march in London when Thatcher invited the South African ambassador back to
Mm.
London. And so we went on a big demo there. It was
It was an
like
interesting time, though, the 80s, because I was just growing up,
amazing,
and
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, Thatcher called like the other side the enemy within, and I remember the miners' strike. I remember
yeah,
going on
yeah,
a trip with my mum, and my mum gave biscuits to striking miners. We went somewhere where there was a mine and that.
yeah,
But you had the miners' strike going on. You had the anti-apartheid thing. You had the Cold War and the fear of a nuclear
yeah,
holocaust. You had military weapons in the UK. And then you had these kind of leftist groups, didn't you? Like the left was quite
yeah,
fractured in the 80s, so you had the
absolutely,
SWP, the Labour Party. But it was
yeah.
a funny time, wasn't it? So you were really at the forefront of all this, weren't you?
Oh, definitely, it was an exciting time,
Mm,
but it was things that I passionately believed in. And it was, you were saying about, the different left groups, it was very sectarian.
mm,
I mean, at the time, the SWP spent more time slagging off the Labour Party and slagging off the Workers' Revolutionary Party than he did slagging off the
mm,
Tories. There's that sectarianism that frustrated me because I thought we should be more united, a single voice against the Tories, because I hated Thatcher with a passion, as most of us did. But it was also a time of hope, thinking that, and I was also quite young and naive, thinking that I could change
mm,
things, by going on all these demos and stuff. But yeah, it was interesting times. But funnily enough, though, I never saw being disabled as like a political issue. I
mm,
never thought things like access was a political issue. I used to get annoyed about, places not being accessible, but I never put the two together because I never really mixed with other disabled people at the time. All my friends were like able-bodied, and disability just wasn't an issue for me. I used to say to people, I'm not disabled. I can do everything for myself, which was a complete lie because I still needed help. But I was kind of in denial of who I really was. And I mentioned in the first interview I went to New York, going to a conference, not about disability, and the bus didn't turn up. And the woman said, "Oh, gee, honey, just use the regular buses." And in the 1980s, every single bus in Manhattan was accessible.
mm.
And I was on cloud nine. I thought, sod the conference. I spent the rest of the week just getting on and off the bus and exploring Manhattan on my own. And I thought, wouldn't that be nice if we had accessible buses in Liverpool? Duh. I never thought it was a right that you should fight for. And like, I'd be going to nightclubs and bouncers would be carrying me upstairs. And I'd be ever so grateful for being carried up the stairs. But instead of demanding a right, and it wasn't until my friend, who's similarly disabled, asked me to go to a meeting at Liverpool University, where I found out about the social model.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mentioned before the guy who had cerebral palsy and he had a speech impairment. And I had to really concentrate on what he was saying. But it was like a light bulb that went off on my head immediately. So after that meeting, I stopped being grateful for being carried upstairs. And I refused to go to a business that
Mm,
excluded me.
mm.
So I got involved in the most radical disabled persons organization, which was DAN, the Disabled Persons Direct Action Network. And we spent most of the time handcuffing ourselves to buses and trains
Just
and
before you
causing,
go into that, Kev,
yeah,
just want to say about the social model. I know we touched it last
yeah,
time, but basically
yeah,
the social model is the idea that if people have got so-called disabilities, that if society changes to accommodate them, they can then live
yeah,
a full life, and that's the objective. And I read a great book called Disability Visibility by Alice Wong a couple of
yeah.
years ago, and I read about that for the
Okay,
first time.
yeah,
And it's something which theoretically we should be doing a lot more today.
yeah.
Sorry, go continue.
Well, it doesn't sort of deny our conditions.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm affected by thalidomide. That's why I use an electric wheelchair. But it depends where I live and the people I interact with is how disabled I am. For
Mm,
example, I could get on and off a bus in Manhattan, so therefore I was less disabled in Manhattan than I was in Liverpool. If I can't get into a building, then that building is disabling me. I'm not the problem, the building's the problem. And I remember talking to someone who was late for a meeting, and he said, sorry I'm late. He said, my wheelchair was too big for the lift. And we said, no, the lift was too small to accommodate your
mm,
wheelchair. it kind of like turned things on its head.
Yeah, yeah.
We're still living in very much an able-bodied world now. It's light years better than it was in the 80s when I used to go to a pub and almost no pubs had an accessible toilet.
Mm,
Almost no pubs you could get into. There wasn't level access. But even when you could get into them, you couldn't go for a piss.
mm,
So I go to the pub with my mates and I just nurse a drink all night. I knew I wouldn't be able to go to the loo till I got home. It was so, and even talking to disabled kids now, they find it hard to believe what it was like even 20 years
mm,
ago. Things have massively improved, but there's still a long way to go. It's something like still 70% of businesses in Liverpool, even today, are not completely accessible or not fully accessible for wheelchair users. And it's not just about wheelchair users, it's about a whole host of different, impairment groups. It's also about understanding and awareness as well, and hidden impairments, hidden disabilities, and mental health issues and things like that. It's right across the board. In the old days, what we call the medical model days, I always blame disability on capitalism and link it to my politics. If you think about it, when the factories were built, people had to keep up with the speeds of the machines in the factories. And it's no accident that at the same time as the factories being built, the institutions were built. So you had like institutions for the blind, institutions for the deaf. You had schools where everyone who had like tuberculosis went to that one school. And it was very much divided by our disabilities, by our impairments. So we were segregated on that level because we were seen as unproductive, because we couldn't keep up with the machines in the factories. So we were dumped in these institutions. And because we were institutionalized, that's when the doctors sort of got involved and the medics. And the aim was either to cure us, and if they couldn't cure us, then we'd be hidden away and contained. So disabled people weren't out in society because we were deemed as unproductive. I mean, I've painted a very simplistic picture, but it is a fact that's what happened really.
mm,
Before the Industrial Revolution, where people worked in like cottage industries and worked at their own pace, disability was less of an issue. Of course, there's always been disabled people around in history, but it was only seen as a problem when we weren't seen as productive. And those attitudes still linger today. We're often written off. I was written off when I was born. You know, that I would never have a job, I'd never get married, blah blah blah. But even my mother had those negative attitudes, and I don't really blame her because she was brought up in that
mm,
society. So when she was on telly when I was a kid saying, he'll never get a job, he'll never get married, she was massively negative.
mm,
That's the social model in a nutshell. But I was angry with myself when I found out about the social model
mm,
that I'd been so pathetic before that.
mm,
Being grateful for being carried upstairs or thinking, wouldn't it be nice if we had accessible buses and trains instead of
mm.
like fighting for it? Direct Action Network.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, as soon as I found out about them, I became like the regional organizer for Liverpool and
yeah.
organised my own demos. And we go to national demos in London where the main event occurs. So, like, I remember one thing we did, we stopped all the buses in Trafalgar Square. This is before it was pedestrianised. And there was like a hundred of us, and we were on different corners of the square. So, as one group would go into the road and stop the traffic, and the police would try and get you back onto the side, then another group on the other end, the other side of the square, would go into the road and stop the
Mm,
buses. And it was amazing. And it wasn't just about having fun. It was making a political point that we couldn't get on the bus
mm,
or we couldn't get on the train. I mean, I'd like to think that I played a small part in that because the buses are accessible now in London. Again, if I lived in London, I'd be less disabled than Liverpool because
mm,
you've got a better transport system in London now. We had an important point to make. And the biggest demo I did was Downing Street when Tony Blair first got in and he started attacking the welfare system. First of all, he went after single mothers and then he went after disabled people. And it was just before Christmas, we had a big demo at the gate of Downing Street and we all jumped out of our chairs and we chucked red paint over
mm.
this gate at Downing Street. I had a big banner saying Tony Blair doesn't care.
Yeah,
And my friend who's blind, Andrew, he's standing next to me with his white cane. And his sign said Blair Scrooge's disabled people because it was just before Christmas. Those photographs were on the front of the New York Times. He went all around the world.
I
And
remember
Tony
that
Blair,
well. I remember
yeah,
that well. It really
yeah.
did because I
So
remember
it had an
Harry
impact.
Harman. Harry
Yeah,
Harman was dealt really badly with questions
yeah,
about the single mothers thing.
yeah,
I remember the disability thing that was all over the news, and it really had
yeah,
an impact, that campaign.
yeah.
And in many ways, you're looking at the Labour Party today. They've just got in. All right, the economic situation's different, but straight away, the two-child benefit limit
Benefit cap. Yeah, yeah,
and the pensioners'
yeah,
winter fuel payments, and it's just
yeah,
like dealt with so badly. Not like as
yeah,
part of a wider package of
yeah,
reform, but they really kind of they did early days of that new Labour government. There were a few things which really begged belief, even in a
yeah,
better economic climate, weren't there?
yeah.
But it was a big campaign, and it really did hit hard.
It is, it is. And also Tony Blair backed down. He didn't attack the disability benefits. And it was also a time of empowerment. I felt empowered because we had the Disability Discrimination Act,
Mm,
which replaced the old Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act. And then that became the Equalities Act. So we had the legislation in our favour. And we
mm,
also had a lot of disability user-led groups springing up as well. We had our own Disability Rights Commission and things like that. But it's kind of like things have gone backwards now.
mm.
You know, all the rights commissions were merged into one big super commission. But that watered down all the issues. You know, it's not the same issues. We needed our own commission. But they did it to save money and also watered down the issues. And a lot of the user-led organisations became incorporated and were taken over by big business. The BCODP, British Council of Disabled People, that's been taken over by Scope, which is the charity for people with cerebral palsy. But the fact it's run by a charity now, the charities were often seen as part of the problem. Yes, you might think they do some good, but they were in control of the money, and very few disabled people had a say in how those charities were run. It's also in the charity's interest to present a kind of medical approach to disability. In other words, they want people to feel sorry for us, so people will give them more money to the
Mm.
charity. But our motto was rights, not charity. We don't want charity, we want rights. And that was our motto. And we very much saw the charities as part of the problem, not the solution. That
That's
was always,
interesting.
yeah,
It's
go
very interesting because although
on.
the Equalities Act was really good, it kind of brought things
Yeah.
together, and I used it myself, and I think people refer to it a lot today, and it's quite interesting that the kind of populist right want to kind of draw back from that, etc. And also about the
Yeah.
Disabled Action Network, Kevin.
Well, yeah, the demo in Downer Street was extremely successful, and it was quite an interesting day. It was very intense. I was covered in red paint, and we all climbed out of our chairs and wanted to make it more awkward for the coppers to arrest
Yeah,
us. But when the coppers arrested us, I was quite relieved because I was dying to go for a wee, and I knew that they had accessible police stations in London with accessible toilets, so I was quite relieved when they arrested me. And the coppers were dead nice. They said, "We'd rather arrest you than terrorists." And he said, "We fully support what you're doing." And he said off the record that, they actually fully supported what we were doing.
yeah,
And we had a lot of sympathy, from the general public, whenever we did any demos. In fact, the only aggression that we had was from other disabled people, would you believe?
really, yeah,
But apparently this is quite common in social movements because, like, the suffragettes got
yeah,
more
yeah.
pressure from other women. And I think it's because it's a fear of change.
Mm.
And people don't realize, that the caged or in chains. And the idea of freedom is kind of scary. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So, like,
yeah,
when we say to other disabled people, you don't need to be institutionalized, you can live independently, that scares the shit out
yeah,
of a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
people. I was quite relieved when I got arrested, and they put us in a cell for about 4 hours. And my friend who's blind, he'd never been arrested before, and he was like really panicking. And they actually put him in my cell because he didn't want to be on his own, which is fair enough. But I kept falling asleep when I was knackered because I'd driven to London the day before. And I kept falling asleep and I snored really loud. And he kept waking me up. That really annoyed me. But I remember driving home with my friends and we stopped off at a cafe in Milton Keynes and we were just covered in red paint and everyone was staring at us. And then I looked at the telly in the cafe and the news was on and there was me and him. in the front of Downing Street. But I remember we drove past Downing Street and all the paint had been washed away. The thing about the Direct Action Network, we were non-violent, and the paint we used was water-based, so it was easily washed away. But we left our mark in other ways, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Another successful action that we did was, if you remember John Prescott, he had portfolios all over the place, and one of his portfolios was transport.
Mm.
So we paid a visit to Hull where he lived. He had this like little castle in Hull, and we had a demo outside his house. But the best demo was when we stopped the bus outside Hull City College, and we kept the bus for a week, and we made it accessible. We put like this portable ramp on it, and all these students came out to college and said, "What you doing? What you doing?" And we ended up like lecturing them about the social model. And they got involved and they were giving out leaflets and things. And the lecturers would come out and they'd be talking to us. So that was a really successful action. And then a week later, we gave the bus back and we had like a big march through the city centre. And the Lord Mayor joined the march. So we had massive support. I organised my own demo in Bootle. Do you remember when the new Strand used to be when you could drive through it before it was pedestrianised?
Yeah, I do, yeah, yeah.
Well, I stopped a bus at both ends of the new Strand. We had two buses and we stopped it. The coppers kept saying, "When are you going home? When are you going home?" I said, "When we've made our point." None of us got arrested. Do you know why we never got arrested in Liverpool?
Well,
Because unlike London, they didn't have accessible vans and
oh, yeah, yeah.
they didn't have accessible police cells. We could have been there till the cows come home. There's nothing they could have done.
Mm.
So that was a successful action as well. And there was a cafe in the Strand who came out with trays of sandwiches and refreshments. So we were like fed for the day as well, which is
What year
amazing.
was that? What was that? The year
Um,
that you did that little protest?
it was just after the DDA. It was when the DDA was getting talked in Parliament. So
Yeah.
that'd be about 94, 95.
Right, right.
So yeah, interesting times.
They were
But
interesting times, but it's funny as well when you get those divisions within groups, and it's almost
yeah,
like a Stockholm syndrome, and
yeah,
you don't speak for all of us. That kind of mentality that you get with things.
yeah,
And I understand people are scared, but it really does. It's interesting, isn't it, how you get that kind of reaction? I mean, when Blair was doing those things with the single mothers and the
yeah,
disabled,
yeah.
he kind of had a lot of the right-wing media on side by that point. But you've got
Oh, massively. Oh,
Keir
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Starmer with the two child benefit and
yeah.
the winter
Pensions.
fuel allowance. They're going for him. Like who's he trying to appeal to? The right wing is so the media is so opposed. They're going for him on absolutely everything.
Yeah,
Who's he trying to appeal to there? I don't get it. But
exactly. I mean,
yeah,
I call it the uni party. There's very little difference now between Labour and Tory. So I just call it the uni party because they're both neoliberals. They both believe in liberalism, the Thatcherite type of liberalism
yeah,
and austerity. They say it's not austerity, but it is.
yeah,
It's austerity Mark two.
yeah,
I mean, I'm starting to hate Keir Starmer the way I hated, Thatcher.
mm,
I hated Blair as well. It's unforgivable about the Iraq War.
mm,
But at least New Labour initially did some good things.
mm,
They did bring in the DTA. They did bring in like short staff for kids and
mm.
things like that. Yeah,
Before we segue on to the Labour Party, I
yeah,
think New Labour came in, didn't he, and said we won't do any tax rises for 2 years.
yeah,
The current Labour government seem to be restricted by that as well. If they said there'll be no increases during the Parliament or
yeah,
I don't know, but they really have created a rod for their own back with those kind of promises because if
yeah.
you can't spend to expand, like give that
Exactly.
stimulus to the economy, you're going to be
How can it
hamstrung,
grow?
aren't you?
How
Yeah,
can the economy grow if you don't expand?
yeah,
I've read a book called Courageous State by Richard Murphy, and he's an economist. And he basically says, you can't look at the government like a household economy. If the government spends, then it's an investment in the country, and
mm,
that pays for itself at the end, creates jobs, so more people pay taxes. But also, if you get the infrastructure right, then it attracts businesses and it
yeah,
attracts growth.
yeah.
So
But
it's a
that
false economy.
it is a
It's
false
that
economy. That's the classic
version.
Keynesian argument, isn't it? That
Yeah,
you need to stimulate the economy for it
absolutely.
to expand. Now,
Yeah,
the old thing about like it's like a household. When coalition came in 2010, the Condem coalition. They said, "Oh no, we need to manage our spending." Now that austerity package is what's led to
Yeah,
the rise of populism, Brexit, etc. Has happened, and this restriction we've got, they kind of moved the Overton window to the right of what's acceptable. And now New
yeah,
Labour have come in, the Labour Party now, fiscal conservatism and trying to pander to the right who are just completely dismissing them. And I just don't get it. It's been a bad
yeah,
start for
100%.
Labour, a bad start.
Absolutely. And
So,
Starmer's popularity, like, it's sunk.
mm,
Everyone hates him, even those that have voted Labour.
yeah,
They
yeah.
don't like Starmer.
But in 97, the economy was starting to expand. Labour came in, let's get rid of
Yeah,
sleaze and all that. New Labour
yeah,
come in. Blair could speak. Blair had these ideas and all this stuff. This is different. They're inheriting a really bad economic situation, and Starmer hasn't got
yeah.
like a story to tell people. And
No,
if he wins one more election, I'll be surprised. But you need to really
yeah.
think, Labour, like, what's our story? What are we saying to people? What are we offering people?
But
Because
they've got nothing to offer. And even in the foreign policy, most people are against what Israel are doing,
mm,
in Lebanon and Gaza. But he's just ignoring that. He's actually forbidden party members to discuss it. They're not allowed to use words like genocide or invasion and things like that. He's more of a control freak than Blair,
mm,
in terms of like the way he doesn't believe in democracy. It's really disgusting. I hate the Labour Party.
yeah.
As I say, I don't see any difference between them and the Tories now.
Do you know the Israel situation? You've got this anti-Semitism label, which I still don't really understand. I have, you sometimes hear people who say things against Jewish people, but they tend to be more on the right than anything else.
Absolutely.
This idea
Yeah,
to change the narrative where any criticism of what the current Israeli government is
yeah,
doing
yeah.
is anti-Semitic. It is absolutely absurd. I just don't understand that. And Labour can say, oh, we've got contracts we need to honour, but we're not going to sell these things. And in many ways, it's a sideshow. It's what the United States does that's more important. And again, you've got an
Yeah,
election there.
100%.
Kamala Harris
Yeah,
she's married to a Jewish man, so they can't accuse
yeah,
her of being anti-Semitic. But she's got to like kind of pander for the Jewish vote. But also, you've seen
yeah,
there the Arab vote has gone against the Democrats in some areas, and
yeah, yeah,
it's difficult. But while this is going on, people are obsessed, aren't they, with boundaries and sovereignty, and Ukraine and Palestine get a lot of the coverage. There's a lot of other things going on, like Sudan, but
yeah,
at the moment, I feel like Labour's just really struggling to find its kind of voice. We know what the Tories were about, which was moving to the right, populism, anti-immigrant stuff. But Labour at the minute, it just seems a bit lost. So what's been your relationship with the Labour Party through the years then?
Well, now I just don't think the Labour Party represents the working class interests. It
Mm,
only represents big business. I mean, years ago, when it was like old Labour, if you like, then at least you had an alternative to the Tories, and it
yeah.
was something to hope for, and change it from within. And I used to be very much a political geek. I still am. I watch all the party conferences, Tory,
Mm,
Liberal, Democrat, whatever. And I've always been passionate about politics and the idea of debate and arguments. I mean, I first joined the Labour Party, even when I lived at home with my mum, I joined the Labour Party. I remember Tony Benn was running to be deputy leader,
mm,
and I voted for him, but Dennis Healey became deputy. That's how old I am, I can remember that. And I used to get carried into the Labour headquarters in Crosby. But I remember in the 80s, I'm going as far back as the 80s now, the Labour Party had what was called a ramp fund, which meant they were saving money up to put their ramp into the building so wheelchairs could get into the building. 10 years down the line, when I'm running the Disabled Direct Action Network, I decided to ask where the ramp fund went because there was no ramp outside the Labour Party headquarters in Crosby. And he said, oh, we spent it on the general election. So that was like a red rag to a bull to me. So I organised a little demo outside the Labour Party headquarters in Crosby. Claire Curtis Thomas was our MP at the time. And she turned up at the demo and said, oh, well, if you wanted to see me, I can see you I think she suggested a GP surgery, the local doctor's surgery. I said, no, I want to see you where all your other constituents here, which was the Labour Party headquarters. So we had a demo there. We tried to chuck blue paint all over the building, but the police confiscated the paint before we got anywhere near the building. But to be fair though, she did change the venue of where she was holding her constituency meetings. She started running it in the local CAB, which was accessible, and they ended up selling the headquarters. So I didn't make a good impression with the Labour Party because I had a demo outside their headquarters in
Yeah.
Crosby. I kind of like got disillusioned by a lot of the demos that I went on. Not that I didn't believe in it or anything like that, but I wanted to sort of like be part of the decision making process. I wanted to be a councillor instead of having a demo outside the town hall. I wanted to be in the town hall where the decisions were made. And then I found out that the town halls were not accessible. And he didn't have to be under the DGA.
Mm.
That was like an addition that was made much later. The town halls didn't have to be accessible. But I did join the Labour Party. But then, obviously, Iraq and everything. I went on the
Mm.
big anti-Iraq war demo, the biggest one in
Mm.
history. I fucked the Labour Party off again, totally
Mm.
disillusioned. And then it wasn't until I was invited to go to a meeting in the Wirral in Birkenhead, and Jeremy Corbyn was giving a speech, and the atmosphere was amazing. He's not a fantastic orator, but what he said was from the heart, and he spoke
Mm.
with passion, and he spoke convincingly. And all this anti-Semitic shit, not an anti-Semitic bone in his body.
Mm.
That was just weaponized by the right-wing media and by people in his own party. The MPs in his own party hated him because he was seen as too left. But if you look at his policies, he was kind of a moderate socialist. If you
Mm.
go to Europe, the
Yeah,
policies
yeah.
he was espousing wouldn't be seen as extreme
Mm.
in
Mm.
like, Scandinavia or even France. He was kind of a moderate socialist, but you know what happened then. He was destroyed by the media and using anti-Semitism as a weapon. And in fact, Keir Starmer has thrown more Jews out the party than any other party leader combined, because not all Jews agree with what Israel are doing.
Mm.
And like Jewish folks for Labour are full of radical people who are against what Israel are doing in their name.
Mm.
And most of them have been expelled from the party.
Mm.
So I resigned,
Mm.
and I actually stood in the local elections in Birkdale.
Mm.
I was a paper candidate. They said you're not going to win. I said okay, but we gave it a good go. And Ralph, who I know you've interviewed, Ralph James.
Yeah, yeah.
He was kind of like my unofficial agent because the agents I had wasn't really bothered because he knew I was a paper
Mm.
candidate. But we put our heart and soul in it. We got out loads of leaflets. We were snubbed by the main party. They were kind of embarrassed what we were doing. The Labour's vote increased more in Birkdale than any other area around Southport. And now they've got a Labour councillor.
Mm.
Ralph and I did the groundwork, if you like,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
we had
yeah,
no
yeah.
we had no help from the main party.
Mm.
When Corbyn was boosted out and all that crap with
Mm.
anti-Semitism, which I knew was crap, I just gave up on the Labour Party again. I've
Mm.
basically given up on party politics now. I've no intention of running for any election. So I'm kind of like in a no man's land in terms of politics. But I'm very, very angry. I can't get Iraq out my head. I can't get Lebanon out my head. What's happening now?
Mm.
It's very, very frustrating. So
Mm.
I'm kind of like, a social media warrior, as you see by
Mm.
me post on Facebook. It,
I
it,
think,
it, it consumes me.
yeah, I think it's very much like people identify particular issues now, and we need more social movements. We need more
Well,
inclusiveness. I think we need things like citizens' assemblies to look at stuff.
absolutely, yeah. I
But
mean,
I mean,
yeah,
I've got a
it's a
similar journey
platform.
with you with the Labour
Yeah,
Party through the years. I'm still in the Labour Party. And
right.
one of the reasons I'm in, I've said this to Ralph as well, is
Yeah,
the dark money that goes into the Conservative Party and what they became is
yeah.
still such a fear to me. Like the riots in Southport and around the country,
Oh,
the
yeah,
rise of
yeah,
reform scares me that much. That
yeah,
even if I disagree with a lot of what the Labour Party are doing, I know that the best chance to stop us going to that real ultra right, and that's basically it for me. I mean, if
yeah,
someone said to me, "Oh, how do you think Labour have started?" I'd go, "Well, I suppose they had to be hard on the riots, but the two things they've done with welfare have been shocking."
yeah,
The
absolutely.
infighting and that. And I know that they're far more under the lens. The right always get away with it, Boris and all that.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
left are
yeah,
always held to a higher standard. I get that. But
yeah,
it is frustrating. But there's a lot of people who say, oh, they're all the same. Like my uncle, he reads the Daily Mail. He goes, oh, they're all the same. You might as well have Boris. And I go, well,
Yeah,
no, I don't agree with that. And that's the one thing where I think, even though my personal beliefs are a certain way, I kind of know where we are globally and
yeah.
that. I'm just scared. People like Elon Musk and stuff. It's just
Oh
a
God, I know.
terrifying world, isn't it? But I mean, I'm involved in like I run a charity. I'm involved in helping with charity and social movements and
Yeah,
speaking to people like you and Ralph and getting the message out there. But party politics, as you say, it's so frustrating and Machiavellian. It's
yeah.
very tough, isn't it?
It's got to come from the grassroots up.
Mm.
It's like it's a class war, really.
Yeah, yeah,
And this country is so entrenched by the establishment and the media and everything else. It's so depressing. But I think things will get a lot worse before they get better. And with the climate crisis and things like that.
yeah,
I mean, when the shit hits the fan, but unfortunately, we'll have to take something catastrophic before people suddenly wake up and realise.
yeah. But
I mean, there are some righteous people in the Labour Party, and I'm still friends with a
absolutely,
lot of
yeah,
them.
yeah,
But it's
yeah.
the MPs that I can't stand,
Yeah.
the establishment ones.
I think one of the things I would struggle with, Kev, is I could join the Labour Party and be an MP and stuff, and I'd do some good stuff. But when someone says, "What do you think about the winter fuel payments?" I say, "Oh, we've completely cut that up." So
Yeah,
therefore, I couldn't be an MP or a councillor because I'd
so
say, "Yeah, it was a
you,
disgrace."
you'd be expelled. Yeah,
Straight away,
yeah,
you're out.
yeah,
And
exactly,
I
exactly.
think I think people like me, you, Ralph, I know a lot of people on the left. We sometimes argue over little details and stuff, but
Yeah,
it is frustrating. It is frustrating
it
the
is,
way
it
that
is.
party discipline. We have very strict party discipline in this country more than other European
Yeah,
nations,
yeah.
and I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right.
I mean, it's partly why I left Dad in a way, because that was just a single issue.
Mm,
I mean, I was consumed by it, and I just lived, breathed, and that's everything about disability.
mm,
And you kind of like get a burnout, and you think, for God's sake, there's other things to campaign for, not just disability. I'm not saying it's not important; it's massively
mm,
important. And I still support Dan now. I wanted to focus more on like class issues and
mm,
all about what we've been discussing, really.
mm,
But where I am now, I mean, I should go back to education. I did finally go to university. I went in my sort of mid-30s. Education wasn't included in the Disability Discrimination Act. The minister who brought in the DDA, by the way, was William Hague. He was the Minister for
mm,
Disabled People. And instead of consulting disabled people, guess who he consulted? He consulted big business and he consulted the charities. He never consulted any disability movements. So that's why the DGA was a load of crap when it was first written and why it had to be completely rewritten. He left out education completely. So that's why the universities were still inaccessible.
mm,
And it wasn't until it was rewritten with the Equalities Act that education was included. And then all of a sudden, universities started spending shitloads of money on making their buildings accessible. That's why there was massive building program went on in the universities because of the legislation. I found a university called Edge Hill University. It was a college of higher education then, accredited to Lancaster University, and it's based in Ormskirk. It's a university in its own right now, but that was the only place of higher learning that was accessible for wheelchair users, and I absolutely loved it. I do kind of regret not going to university when I was 18,
mm.
but even in my mid-30s, being a student and mixing with young people and listening to their ideas, I was just on cloud nine. I absolutely loved it, going to uni. It's the best years of my life in Edge Hill. And then when I got my degree, and that's the other thing, I did applied social sciences, which was a mixture of politics and philosophy and
Mm.
criminology. And I did a minor subject in disability studies, and we discussed the social model and all the rest of it. It was just at the time when I found the social model. If I'd have found the social model, I wouldn't have touched disability studies with a
Mm.
barge pole because I didn't want to be
Yeah.
pigeonholed. But because I was passionate about disability then, I did disability studies as well. When I got my degree, I went to Leeds and commuted twice a week to Leeds and did a postgrad diploma. But a long story short, I didn't do my masters, which I do regret now. But I didn't finish my master's degree. But because I had my postgrad diploma, Jill invited me back to be a guest lecturer. So I started giving lectures to first year students around the social model and using my own life experiences as well. And as the senior lecturer said, that was the advantage I had over him because he couldn't talk about his life
Mm,
experiences because he wasn't disabled. Yeah, I really loved doing the lecture and it was fabulous. And then I got involved in another organisation where I was sent to different universities like Hope University and Liverpool University and John Moores, where I talked to trainee doctors. And I was amazed at how many trainee doctors had never even heard of thalidomide. I mean,
mm,
okay, it was 50 years, 60 years ago, but it was the biggest medical
mm,
scandal in history. And to be fair, a lot of the students were from overseas,
mm,
where they might not have come across any thalidomiders. But it was all brand new to them. They were fascinated by it. It's actually on the national curriculum now for doctors. You know,
mm,
they've got to learn about thalidomide. So,
mm,
but it was COVID basically stopped everything. Once COVID came along, and I actually contracted COVID, but I wasn't seriously ill. But I was also diagnosed with diabetes, and my health has just gone to the floor, really.
mm,
So I've not done anything since then. I'm kind of like retired, and
mm.
that's the frustrating thing. I need to be more active.
When I went
Yeah,
to uni, I'm from Bull, and my
yeah,
mum and dad always encouraged me to do well at school and stuff. But I got into academic studies and
yeah,
studied history and politics, and then went into teaching. But the experiences I had at university just completely changed everything about me. I just saw a new world.
yeah,
And what you said there about being there, having the time of your life, it was a sacred time, the friendships, the politics. Literally,
yeah,
I was studying politics. I did a bit of
yeah,
sport. To meet people from around the world, people with different
yeah,
opinions. I remember
yeah,
thinking, oh my God, there's a Tory. Like, and he was saying why they were Tories, and I was just like, jaw hit the floor.
yeah,
It is a great time. So, what are you up to now then? Obviously, COVID and diabetes has impacted you.
yeah.
What's Kevin Donnellon doing these days, and
Okay.
what's your family
Sorry, just before
background?
I forget, that's another unforgivable thing about the Labour Party. That was the party that brought in tuition fees.
Yeah,
And for
yeah, yeah.
years, education was free. And it should be free, it should be a right for everyone.
Mm,
This government now increasing the fees to 10.5 grand, that's absolutely disgusting. Where are we up to now? Apart from doing interviews with you, not a lot, to be honest. Obviously, I'm following politics and keeping up to speed with the world, and that's get me ever so depressed. I'm actually a family man. I became a dad at the grand age of 49, which was completely out the blue. I had quite a few girlfriends, over the years, but I met Angela, an au pair working in Cheltenham for another woman who was thalidomide with the same disability. And she was born without any hands at all. She just had shoulders, and she had feet attached to her hips like me, four limber. And she had two kids. I was divorced from her husband. And Angela was working for her as an au pair, looking after her kids in Cheltenham. And I met Angela there, and we hit it off. And we were just mates, to be honest. We were friends for like 10 years. And she's from South Wales. She was brought up in a very, very religious, strict upbringing. Her mum and dad are Pentecostals. Her dad was a Pentecostal minister. And he just read one book, and that was the Bible, and he believes in it word for word. And I'm an atheist, so you can imagine the banter we had. But I got on really well with him, even though he's trying to convert me constantly. Actually, they actually accepted me when I started going out with Angela romantically. They didn't mind, which was mad, because like a lot of the times I'd have a girlfriend, and the biggest problem was their parents.
mm,
They'd freak out, oh my God, my daughter's going out with someone severely disabled. But they accepted me totally, so that was nice. I don't know, it's weird. Angela always wanted children. She was desperate to be a mother. And she was in previous relationships where, kids never came along. Basically, she got pregnant, Daisy came along, and I was thrilled to bits. It was quite a long birth. She was in labour for hours.
mm,
And then he said, after like 12 hours or something, he said, we'll have to do a cesarean. She went into the emergency room, and I went into the waiting room with her dad, and her dad was praying like mad. And which I was grateful for, because I was like panicking as well. And then Daisy came out, and it was amazing. It was very emotional.
mm.
And I knew she would be thalidomide. I knew it would be passed on. But I just did a quick sneak to make sure she had,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
10 fingers and 10 toes.
yeah,
And she was fabulous.
yeah.
And then 2 days later, they took the baby off her and put her in an incubator because they had found like patches on her lungs.
Mm,
So that was touch and go. Poor Angela was in the maternity ward, and all the mothers had their babies, and she was on her own without a
mm,
baby, and she was crying her eyes out. So they put her in a separate room. Anyway, cut the long story short, she came out of the incubation after about a month. She was a happy, healthy baby. She was fabulous. Daisy. We called her Daisy. It was only when she was in school that the school noticed she was different to other kids. And they diagnosed that she had ADHD, autism, and some other label.
mm,
I hate getting bogged down with labels. But neurodivergence is
yeah,
the buzzword now, isn't it?
yeah,
And initially I was kind of in denial. I said, no, don't be daft. She's just a normal, happy kid. But it was only as she got older. She was very popular. She had lots of mates. But she was into the same things for years, and her mates had kind of moved on.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
you could tell the gap as they got older. So her brain wasn't developing in the same way as the other kids. And when she was in her final year at uni school, it was sad, really. All her mates had kind of moved on, and she was kind
mm,
of like more isolated. And then we talked about like what school she should go to, and then someone suggested taking her to getting her in an SEN school. So I just flipped. I said, "There's no way
mm.
she's going to fucking special school," because I was thinking about all the
Yeah,
horrors that I'd been through. But obviously, I'm talking about 60 years ago. But I went round the school called Crosby High, and the fact it's called Crosby High School, you know, is good because it sounds like a mainstream school. And I went round and I was blown away by it, to be honest. It was totally unlike any special
yeah,
school that I'd experienced. And I had a really long chat with Angela and professionals and people like that. And we thought, in terms of bullying, in terms of like her thriving and getting on, to be honest, it was the best thing we ever did.
yeah,
And
yeah,
she's
yeah,
thriving. She's brilliant. She is thriving there. And
yeah,
she absolutely loves going to school. I was resistant for ages, but she's been there. This is her third year now. No, she's year 11. In my day, we didn't have all that, but I think she's year 11.
yeah.
But it's
Fifth year.
actually, yeah, yeah, exactly. I think we made the right decision.
Yeah,
You know, I strongly, strongly resisted it. But even the philosophy's totally changed, and they've kind of adopted the social
yeah,
model, and the emphasis is about they're talking about independent living and things like that. And
mm,
there's no reason why she wouldn't be able to live independently. She might need support probably for the rest of her life in terms of her vulnerability. But I hope she finds a nice fella or whoever
mm,
who will, care for her and not take advantage of, her vulnerability. But at the moment, she's really happy and she is thriving. I've also got another child called Oliver, the chalk and cheese. Oliver goes to the same junior school. He's 8. Daisy's 13 now. She's 14 in December. And Oliver is 8. He's just turned 8 and he's going to the same junior school. Chalk and cheese. I've got no problems with Oliver. I've got no problems with Daisy. She's a lovely kid. There's no behavioural issues with her whatsoever. She's good as gold.
mm,
And Oliver, he's just a character, totally chalk and cheese. And I love being a dad. Even now, when he still says daddy, I still almost well off. It's just
yeah,
that
yeah,
I never thought I'd be a dad. When I think about listening to my mother saying, he'll never have kids, he's infertile, all
mm,
this shit. So it's quite amazing. I'm becoming a dad at 49. That'll be on my gravestone. I can't believe I'm a dad at 49. I
yeah,
mean, I'm 63 now. I'm 63 in November. And when I do the school run, a lot of the parents assume I'm the
yeah, yeah,
grandparent because I'm
yeah,
certainly old enough to be his granddad. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But where I am now, I'm bloody happy in terms of I've got a loving wife. She's absolutely fabulous. Angela works as a teaching assistant in the junior school. So she has a part-time job, so we're not in each other's hair. I've still got a PA who comes in and does things for me,
yeah,
because I said to her from the very beginning, "You're my lover. You're not my carer. I don't want you to be my carer." And she said, "Well, I do care." I said, "I know. Of course, you care in your own way, but I don't want you to be my carer." And she agreed. So I've still got a PA, Jim, who
yeah,
comes in the mornings. It's worked out amazing. We got married when Daisy was 3 because her dad was saying, "You're living in sin, you're living in sin." And I thought, well, I'll get married when we're ready, not when you fucking want us to. It was amazing, actually. We got married in Liverpool Town Hall. And then we had the reception in the Radisson Blue Hotel. Cost a fortune, the fucking wedding. I wasn't asked about a wedding, but Angela was at the wedding.
Yeah.
So, but it was a nice day. It was really good. And Daisy was the flower girl. And then Ollie came along, about 2 years later, I think. Yeah, it's a 5 year age gap between them. So that's where I am now. I think I'm the last thalidomide to be a parent. Because most thalidomiders are actually grandparents now.
Mm.
I remember going to the Thalidomide Society every year, and it started off with it was just our gang, and then a couple of them would bring along their babies,
Mm.
and then eventually there'd be like loads and loads of kids. They all had kids, or a lot of them had kids, and then they brought the grandkids. But yeah, so Daisy and Oliver, the last kids born to a Thalidomide parent, I think. It
Wow.
probably in this country, if not the world. So
Mm.
so
Nice.
yeah, so
It's
that's where
a,
we are now.
I think that's a lovely way to finish with that story of positivity and becoming a parent. I became a parent at 42, and again,
Yeah,
I've got a genetic condition where it's not always possible to become a father. It was probably the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me, and I can tell it's the same for you as well.
yeah,
But I think that's a lovely way to finish things there, Kevin. But thanks for telling us
it
your
is.
story. And
Okay.
many people think that, oh, people who are disabled, like, they just want to moan and complain about their life. But with you, it's like, no, no, I want to live a normal life. I want to be
Yeah,
positive. I want to
yeah.
enjoy it. And I think I mentioned this on the last podcast when I read the motorcycle diary, Che Guevara. I
Oh
remember
yeah,
someone had wrote at the top a quote like, "It's true. Marxists just want to have fun." And
exactly.
I think
Yeah,
disabled people, you can label people all you like, but at the end of
yeah,
the day, people just want to live normal lives and fulfilling and
absolutely.
happy lives, and we need to spread that as much as we can around the
I
world.
mean,
So,
to be honest, I feel extremely fortunate. In
mm,
fact, I've probably had more of an interesting life than many quote non-disabled people.
mm,
And my older brother, I might have mentioned him in the first interview, who sadly died.
yeah,
He had a lot of mental health issues, which wasn't diagnosed. He
mm,
was just written off as a stupid boy, and then my mum and dad used to batter him, and my mother would say, "Be all right once he got a girlfriend." But he had severe mental health issues,
mm,
and sadly he died. I mean, his life was miserable compared to
yeah,
mine,
yeah, yeah,
and he wasn't like outwardly disabled. Physically he was fine. But
mm,
I've been extremely fortunate. In fact, I don't worry about me now at all. But now I've become a dad, the only thing I worry about is the future for my kids.
yeah, yeah,
And I think that's why I stay political. It's not for me, it's for my kids. I've
mm.
lived my life, but I want to fight for my kids now.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And just one final thing, time's nearly
Yeah,
up. Like they say, if we tolerate this, our children will be next, and that applies to everyone, whether you're disabled or not. And
exactly.
I think the average person in the UK now is economically quite poor, and we seem to be clueless as to what we need to do to solve that. So, for the future of our children. So, Kevin, thank you very
Exactly.
much.